When I was younger, sitcoms weren't just shows, they were an event almost. The kind of thing families would actually sit down and watch together. Before the age of streaming made us all scatter into our own little content bubbles. Sort of like the one that I'm trying to create now. But even in the golden age of appointment television, there was something uniquely special about black sitcoms. I mean, we can all acknowledge that television has always been dominated by certain perspectives, and it's no accident that when black sitcoms came along, they felt different. They weren't just entertainment, they were a cultural reset. They carried weight, they had soul. Now, when I say black sitcoms, your mind probably goes to a couple obvious ones depending on your generation. For some people, it's The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. For others, it's The Cosby Show, Family Matters, Martin, Living Single, Girlfriends, The Jamie Foxx Show, Everybody Hates Chris, The Bernie Mac Show, and the list goes on. Well, each one has its own flavor, its own lane, but taken together, they form something bigger than just a TV genre. They're basically snapshots of black life across decades, giving us everything from slapstick comedy to biting social commentary. And let's be clear, the magic of black sitcoms isn't just that they were funny. Lots of shows are funny. The magic was in the way they were able to do several things at once. They made you laugh, yes, but they also made you feel seen. They were aspirational while also being grounded. They could be silly on the surface, but sneak in a lesson that stuck with you long after the credits rolled. Black sitcoms managed to be entertainment, education, representation, and even activism, all wrapped in a 22-minute laugh track package. Let's start with one of the biggest, The Cosby Show. Now, yes, we all know what has since happened with Bill Cosby, and it is important not to ignore that, but if we isolate the cultural impact of the show itself, it's undeniable. When The Cosby Show premiered in 1984, it completely flipped the mainstream image of black families on television. Before that, a lot of portrayals leaned into struggle, poverty, or crime. But here you had the Huxtables, an upper middle class black family living in Brooklyn with a doctor dad and a lawyer mom. They weren't the token black family in a white world. They were the center. They had financial stability, strong family bonds, and the kinds of little sitcom hijinks that were usually reserved for white families on TV. For millions of viewers, black and white alike, that was revolutionary. But what's even more important is that while the Huxtables were aspirational, they never felt fake. They weren't written as some impossible ideal of what black families quote-unquote should be. They still had conflicts, jokes, and the occasional bit of chaos in their household. The show proved that black stories could carry universal themes while still feeling distinctly black. And that's not to mention the indirect impact The Cosby Show had on black culture via its spin-off, A Different World. A show that is arguably responsible for reinvigorating interest in HBCUs. And from there, the door opened wider. You got Family Matters, which, let's be real, probably wouldn't have survived without the unplanned rise of Steve Urkel. But what's interesting about that show is that it started off as a pretty straightforward family sitcom about the Winslows, a middle-class black family in Chicago. It was warm, it was relatable, and it was funny. Then Urkel came in with all his eccentricities and turned it into this wild mix of heartfelt family moments and cartoonish comedy. But even with the wackiness, it kept returning to those grounding family themes. And more importantly, Family Matters gave us one of those enduring sitcom tropes. The black dad who's both stern and loving, like Carl Winslow. You know, the guy who would lecture you when you messed up, but hug you 2 minutes later. And then you had Fresh Prince, which is honestly in a category of its own. That show was genius, because it tricked you into thinking you were just watching Will Smith clown around and make jokes, when really you were watching a brilliant dissection of class, race, and identity in America. The premise itself is a perfect setup. A kid from West Philly gets sent to live with his rich relatives in Bel Air. It's funny because of the culture clash, but it's also profound because it forces the show to constantly ask questions about what it means to make it. Questions about assimilation, or what about getting lost or compromise when you try to mix and move between the two worlds. Think about how many sitcoms had the moment, the one you remember not just because it was funny, but because it hit you in the chest. For Fresh Prince, it's that heartbreaking scene where Will breaks down asking Uncle Phil, how come he don't want me, man, about his dad. That's not just good television, that's catharsis. That's representation of real pain that many kids, especially black kids, could see themselves in. And yet, the brilliance of black sitcoms is that the very next episode could have you laughing about Jazz getting thrown out the front door again. That balance between heavy truths and light-hearted comedy is part of the magic. But let's be honest, black people have always used humor to navigate pain. Comedy is survival, it's resilience. So when these sitcoms combined laugh out loud moments with deep social commentary, they weren't just being clever, they were being authentic. Now, I want to pause and make a quick tangent here because I think it's important to talk about the role of community in black sitcoms. While sitcoms often revolve around one character or a nuclear family, black sitcoms tend to feel wider, fuller, more communal. Think about Living Single. That show was literally just a group of friends sharing their lives, but it was groundbreaking because it showed young, successful black women leading a show without being sidekicks to anyone else, and the chemistry of that group made it clear community matters. Or take Martin. That show was hilarious in part because Martin himself was wild, but also because his friends, his neighbors, his girlfriend Gina, it was never just about him. It was about how he fit into his world. And beyond that, community shows up in the way these sitcoms were consumed. Watching Fresh Prince of Martin wasn't just about sitting on the couch. It was about coming to school the next day and quoting the jokes with your friends. It was about how these roles and how these shows shaped slang and fashion, even music. You can't tell me that black sitcoms didn't play a role in shaping hip-hop culture and vice versa. They were in conversation with the world outside the screen. Another tangent before I tie it back is the generational impact of black sitcoms. If you grew up watching black sitcoms in the 90s or early 2000s, those shows didn't just entertain you, they shaped your worldview. They made you see black people as multidimensional, goofy, brilliant, successful, flawed, resilient, romantic, dramatic. And if you weren't black, they gave you access to perspectives that you might otherwise not encounter. That's why I say they were more than shows, they were cultural bridges. And this is where things get tricky, because while black sitcoms thrived in certain eras, you can also see the way they've been devalued by the industry over time. Networks constantly shuffle them around, cancel them early, or failed to properly promote them. There's this pattern of underestimating how much these shows mattered, even while they were literally carrying entire lineups. For example, Living Single actually premiered before Friends and had basically the same concept, a group of young people navigating life together, but Friends got the massive budget, the endless marketing, and became a global phenomenon, while Living Single was quietly sidelined. You can't tell me race didn't play a role in that. And yet, despite that, the magic endures. Even now, people are still discovering or rediscovering these shows on streaming. Younger generations are watching Girlfriends or One-on-One for the first time and realizing how ahead of the time they were. That's the thing about black sitcoms. Their impact doesn't fade because they were never just about the moment. They were about capturing the truth of black life, and truth is timeless. To bring it back full circle, the magic of black sitcoms is that they are both mirrors and megaphones. They reflect black life to black audience, saying, "You are seen, you are valid, you are worthy of laughter and love." And at the same time, they broadcast to the wider world, "This is us, in all our complexity." That duality, it's powerful. And look, I'm not saying every black sitcom is a masterpiece. Some were cheesy, some were overly formulaic, some definitely had some rough seasons. But even the lesser ones still mattered because representation matters. Seeing a black family or a group of black friends lead their own show without being stereotypes was itself radical. So when I think about the legacy of black sitcoms, I don't just think about the laughs, I think about the lessons, the cultural shifts, the way they stitch themselves into our collective memory. I think about how many of us can still recite entire theme songs word for word, or how catchphrases are still part of our vocabulary decades later. That's not just nostalgia. That's cultural permanence. And maybe that's the final piece of the magic. Black sitcoms weren't trying to be important. They were just telling stories, being funny, being human. And in doing so, they ended up being some of the most important television we've ever had. So yeah, when I say the magic of black sitcoms, I mean all of it. The laughter, the lessons, the representation, the impact that still echoes today. Because they didn't just entertain us, they shaped us. And to me at least, that's real magic. Now, I may have let it slip a couple times in the video that I am a software engineer, and I'm bringing it up now for a very specific purpose. I do want to introduce you to candorcloud.com. It is a cloud storage web app that I built myself from scratch and still working on. And the reason I am mentioning it is because rather than push a Patreon where I feel the need to come up with creative incentives and rewards for my patrons, I decided I would rather provide you direct value. So if you would like to support this channel and help it grow, please go to candorcloud.com. If you want, you can just check it out by starting with the free tier, 10 gigabytes for free, 100% free. We also have monthly, annual, and lifetime plans where you can just make one purchase and you have the storage for the lifetime of the service or your lifetime, whichever ends first. And it is a great way to support this channel. And like I said, new features are still being worked on. Currently in the paid tiers, there's a music player, a video player, and client-side zero knowledge encryption. So please check it out, and there'll be more to come. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends.